community, distinguished ABF members, and distinguished members of the LUMS alumni community. Good evening. As Marwa briefly mentioned, the American Business Forum represents US companies, their subsidiaries and affiliates operating in Pakistan. Our members are companies that are vested in and invested in Pakistan's economic success, and we are very proud to be partnering with LUMS, the country's premier multidisciplinary university, on a series of thought leadership sessions and events focused on the Pakistani economy. Unfortunately, we have existed over several decades in an ecosystem that is rent-seeking and transactional in nature. We are victims of short-term thinking, and I don't just lay the blame on this for the government. The private sector equally has been very short-term focused and rent-seeking in nature. This is why every year as the budget approaches, we approach government with suggestions on reducing interest rates or tweaking this tax here or that tariff there, and the long-term economic reform that desperately needs to take place in Pakistan gets ignored by the wayside. And that's what we hope to change through these series of engagements, is to help be part of that larger collective nudge towards serious long-term reform in Pakistan. This evening session, Reset, which is the first in this series, could not have a better set of participants. Professor Durkon, Marwa will introduce him formally, but he's one of the world's leading development economists, and his book, Gambling on Development, is a seminal work that I would recommend everyone in this room to read. So in true LUMS fashion, we're also giving you homework today. In the discussants, we're very honored to have Mr. Billal Keyani, Minister of State for Finance and Railways. I know Billal as a progressive and deep thinker, and as a bridge builder, which is a critical skill in the context of making reform reality. So Billal, the country's hopes weigh very heavily on you. You should just know that. Similarly, Mr. Ali Nasir, who is here also, is a corporate leader with over 30 years of experience. He started his career in the civil service, and as such would be able to give us deep insight on how a reset can actually happen. Our moderator, of course, Dr. Ali Hasnain, needs no introduction. He's former chair of the economics department, and his work in technology, media, and information systems, and their role in improving service delivery and market functioning is very well known. I know there is an earth-shattering cricket match at the other end of this session, so we'll keep it tight. And just for everyone to know, there's no need to rush out of this room the moment it's 6:30, because the screen will then show you the results, the score as well. So please stay on, and we look forward to your presence also in future sessions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Osman Saab. My introduction should have included your sense of humor. So I know we have a number of LUMS alumni in the room. So in a special moment for you, I'm really excited to now introduce you to the Director of Advancement at LUMS, who is also a fellow alum. He's from the MBA class of 2009. So on behalf of LUMS, please welcome Mr. Ali Ibrahim.
Honorable State Minister, dignitaries, ladies and gentlemen, fellow alumni, my team, Assalamu alaikum. I welcome you all to this important policy dialogue, which brings together industry and academia at a very critical juncture when Pakistan is rethinking its growth priorities, what the next future is going to look like, and how we can all play our part in terms of making sure that we support the sustainable ecosystem. It is particularly very heartening for me, what Marwa just mentioned, to see our fellow alumni who represent different industries, corporate sectors, public policy, who take the LUMS badge into boardrooms, startups, entrepreneurial ventures, and global corporations wherever they go out within the country and outside the world. So your presence reinforces the very core belief that universities do not operate in isolation. They exist in continuous dialogue with the society. As an alumni myself, I have experienced this firsthand, how LUMS prepares graduates for conversations like these around public policy discourse. LUMS goes beyond the functional training to develop rigorous inquiry-based and multidimensional thinking that allows our graduates the ability to solve complex problems. At LUMS, as part of our institutional mission, research is not just an adjunct entity for us. It sits at the epicenter. We understand and respond to major challenges that our country currently faces, whether it's economic reform, fiscal sustainability, public health systems, climate resilience, energy transformation, AI systems. Everything is organized around thematic verticals that matter profoundly to the country's long-term future. Through our schools and research centers across economics, business, law, science and engineering, and social sciences, we generate evidence-based research that informs policy, strengthens institutions, and delivers real-world impact beyond academia. By integrating these disciplines into the classroom, we offer that kind of experiential learning where students tackle live data, real policy challenges, and Pakistan-relevant challenges and solutions. Today's dialogue reflects precisely why we are gathered over here, where we bridge to seek and strengthen the relationship between academia and industry. Research must inform enterprise. Industry must inform curricula. Policy making must be grounded in data and insight. And as alumni who sit over here at the intersection of all these worlds are critical to make sure that this is something which we can sustain over the long term. I look forward to the conversation that is going to emerge and some of the insights that will come forward from this evening, and to strengthen this shared commitment between industry, academia, our valuable partners, the American Business Forum, and our remarkable alumni committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ali Saab. I hope that we can also carry forward the enthusiasm that you're bringing to this evening. It's my pleasure now to move to our keynote address for the evening. As Usman Saab said, we're very, very lucky to have our keynote speaker here today. It's a privilege to introduce Dr. Stefan Durkin, Professor of Economic Policy at the University of Oxford. Dr. Durkin is a globally recognized and respected development economist whose work has shaped thinking across the world on growth, poverty reduction, and state capability. He has served as the chief economist at UK's Department for International Development, and he's advised governments across Asia and Africa on economic strategy and reform. He's also the author of the influential book, Gambling on Development. As Usman Saab said, your homework is already laid out for you. We hope you get a chance to pick up a copy if you haven't. And today, Dr. Durkin will share a strategic perspective on the economic outlook and fiscal priorities ahead. So please join me in giving him the welcome he deserves. Please welcome Dr. Stefan Durkin.
Right, thank you very much. Look, first of all, I hope I won't speak too long. I want it to be largely something that offers a space for discussion. So I want to thank the organizers and the insistence of the organizers that we should do something like this. It's great to be able to do this. I just want to actually start by don't overstate my role, okay? I'm a bit like in the, your cousin's uncle's doctor who gets called upon to give a bit of a second opinion when, your local doctors have already for a long time said what you have to do. There are also a few quacks around that say all kinds of things that you also should be doing. And so within that noise, you want to know actually maybe a second opinion. I see myself being called in somehow. Can I help as a second opinion in terms of the diagnosis? Can I help to identify who are the quacks and who are the real doctors? Similarly, in terms of the treatment, can I get a little bit of a sense of that? So I was a civil servant also in the UK government, as people were saying, a chief economist. I was a technocrat. It's really always good to be able to say, look, advisors advise, it's ministers that decide. And it's just it. But let me try to give you a sense of where I think we are and what needs to be done. So look, I think it's not wrong, even though it's fragile, to actually talk about stabilization as being quite successful. Okay, I want to invite the business people to think what January 23 looked like. Okay, so that's a very different world you looked at. You couldn't get any dollars, couldn't get anything imported there, no resources and so on. And everything was really complicated. So, inflation is it's more or less, it's definitely brought down. Let's put it like this: foreign reserves are growing. And the IMF is, broadly speaking, quite happy. And yeah, it's maybe people say, well, that's a typical thing. We do this for a couple of years and then actually pressures will rise. And yes, we wouldn't be in this meeting and there wouldn't be all these cameras if there is not a lot of people that think, this is the moment. Actually, SBP is saying, growth is 4.75% at least as the forecast, because agriculture seems to have done better than expected despite the floods. But of course, there's other statistics that really still concern me. Export is barely 10% of GDP. Investments is 13%, but there's 4% public investment, so it's like less than 10% private investment as well. Business people here in the room are not investing, and there's not enough exporting going on as well. So what does the business community want? I do get the WhatsApps as well. I do get the messages and the invitations and so on. Actually, in some sense, it's not the same what politicians want. In fact, what a lot of people want. We want growth in this country. We do want the economy to grow. Okay, so I have bad news for you to start with, but just a word of caution. What economic research tells us, multiple people have done this piece of research. The Asian Development Bank, I understand State Bank of Pakistan has done a similar piece of research recently. World Bank people have researched this. Once this economy, in its current structure, gets to about 3.8 or 4.2% growth, let's book the flights to Washington to get a new IMF program. Okay? So if the State Bank says 4.75% growth, that's 0.75, I'm worried because the structure of the economy isn't really changing. We see that. Investment is low, exports is low. We still have an economy where virtually anything that's earned is consumed. A lot of it by the government, but not just that. A lot of it also by people. Investment and savings rates are very low. And it's both sides. It's government consumes a lot, and private sector, private individuals and so on consume a lot. Export is too low. And we also haven't quite managed to do the kind of reforms to make this a state of the 21st century. This is actually still a pretty inefficient state to global standards in its own operation. And it does far too much. It either has or encourages monopolies. It encourages a lot of firms that it shouldn't be being in sectors that it shouldn't be doing. So actually, if you think of it, okay, the structure of the economy, and I've just described it, a low investment, low export, and too much parts of the state, not all of it, there's some pretty efficient parts of the state, but too many of the state parts are actually inefficient as well. So you get all these things together, well, that's the structure. So what you're talking about, where are the structural reforms? It's actually changing that structure, and it's not just something here or some benefit here or there. But I want to repeat again, the research tells us that if the economy starts growing more than 4% in this structure, just get ready to book the flights of the finance minister to go to Washington. Now, I ask my question, is that what you want? That we actually go to an IMF program 25, 26, 27? I don't think anyone wants this. But I do have the impression, and I'll come back to it, that a lot of voices in this society just don't understand that you can't have the cake and eat it. You can't push the envelope out without thinking about, well, where will it come from? What will it mean? And for a moment, I'm actually not even necessarily talking about a fiscal deficit. Of course, all these things are interlinked. But I'm just talking about the balance of payments that cannot sustain a lot of the things that a lot of people are asking for, including many of the business associations. So I just want to make sure that that gets clocked. When I talk to individual businesses, and I spent my time in the last week also in Karachi, I talked to endless business leaders here as well in Islamabad, all kinds of events that were organized by friendly, let's call it a friendly embassy, where actually we were talking to endless business people. And once we go behind it, people are more reasonable. But I would actually ask in the first instance, don't make all this push that you have, where there is a sense that a reaction needs to come on a large scale, a push because, oh, if we push hard, we'll get a little bit. No, can I assure you, in policy making terms, you make chaos, okay? And there's a lot of people that believe that actually we can do. So I'll come back to this in a moment. I want to explain what it means to do structural reforms. And I will also talk about countries that did them. China started doing them in the 1980s and in the 1990s. India did them in the 1990s. US and Europe had to do it in the 1980s as well, because the structure of the economy had to change. I ended up coming from Belgium into Britain during the miners' strike because, yes, structural transformation was happening. And it is difficult. It's politically difficult, it is socially difficult, it is for businesses difficult. But I'm afraid my message is here. If you want a structure of the economy in Pakistan that can grow, you'll need to be partners thinking through how can we get to this. Okay? So, exports have to happen, right? It's important, it's existentially important for this economy. And I'm saying existentially, because if we can't get a trade balance that works better, can't rely on the remittances all the time. And I know part of the remittances are probably payments for other exports in IT, but it's not enough. If we want a stable trade balance, we need to be thinking about, well, 10% of GDP. It's the lowest in Asia, and it's really too low to be comfortable. It needs to be really increasing dramatically. And, how to do it? Well, we need to find a way. But we have to do it in a way that stability is maintained. Because if we undermine the stability today, while doing this, and all the proposals that are coming, I'll come back to this, all the proposals that come in say, yeah, well, we will only do it if you do this for the tariff, if you do it for the electricity tariff, and you do this for CIT, and you did for this and this and this, and the shopping list is very long. Say, well, okay. But, how do we do this? How do we work together to think through it? And I want to emphasize what does structural change mean, structural reforms mean. They mean that at a moment in the economy, especially capital is not necessarily in the right place. Capital is not in the place where it should be to have a structure of the economy that actually can grow. Capital is allocated in parts that actually are not competitive, but they are there because there are all kinds of incentives for the capital to be there. And so we just not all of it, and I'm sure there's lots of good businesses here, but there is some of the capital, it's there. So, there is not enough capital on the frontier where investment pays up because Pakistan is competitive. Okay? I want to give you a few figures here. In the last 30 years, everybody complains about the electricity tariff today and the taxes here. In the last 35 years, productivity growth in Pakistan has been 1/10 of what Vietnam has achieved and 1/5 of what India has achieved. Okay? Now, that's not just because today there happens to be a super tax, okay? That's not just like that. I can assure you it doesn't help, but it is there. And so we need to kind of really think what actually we'll be getting it. Okay, the structural change that happened in Europe and in the US happened in a lot of low-income countries, and Pakistan in 1990 was a low-income country. It happened since 1990 in quite a lot of places. In fact, low-income countries since 1990 are the fastest growing income group. Countries that were low income in 1990. And again, I say Pakistan was part of it, together with India, with China, with Vietnam, and so on. They were the fastest growing economies in the world. They grew by per capita terms 5.4% per year since 1990. Pakistan did in this period in per capita terms 1.8%. It was below the median of all the low-income countries. How did all these economies manage to grow? The ones that were successful, because they took the one opportunity that was suddenly offered, they engaged with globalization. Pakistan looked inwards and didn't do it. And Pakistan looked inwards in a way that actually created a whole series of issues. In fact, if you compare those countries, it's about 25 of them, that were growing more than the median growth for low-income countries in that period. Again, Pakistan is not in it, but India is in it, China is in it, Vietnam is in it. There's three characteristics that they did that Pakistan didn't do. Put it differently, there's a significant difference between these fast growers and the ones that stayed behind. They managed to actually become more open and be more an economy that engaged with the global economy, very strongly so. They engaged with globalization, as I alluded to. They basically opened up their economy for competition. At the same time, they started to export more. And they focused on exports and gaining this. And a lot of the measures that they took were focused on supporting exports further. They also cut down on regulatory controls. And the data I'm quoting is actually from Fraser Institute that has done, since the late 1980s, done this for every country in the world. Their index of regulatory quality, Pakistan was amongst the lower, and all the successful ones, they improved the regulatory environment, the regulatory quality. And also the regulatory burden went down. And finally, they improved the legal and property rights systems for commercial law, contract enforcement, property rights they did. Pakistan stayed behind. They stayed behind on engagement with globalization, looked inwards, and then all the other things that I mentioned, they made more complicated, and they didn't progress. Now, what is structural reform? Very easily, it's changing that. It's fundamentally going and doing what the fast-growing low-income countries that outpaced the growth in high-income countries 3 to 4-fold in this period, is to say, maybe we want to belong to that group of lower middle-income countries that are doing far better than the high-income countries in the world. Now, how do I compare that with what I hear in terms of proposals and lobby work from business associations and from lots of other people in the political space, and indeed from journalists and commentators, and they also say, and a lot of quacks, that actually shouldn't really be commenting on the economy because they have clearly little clue about it. But people read it. Actually, finance minister called it, they want a sugar rush. They want a fiscal stimulus as quickly as possible. In fact, proposals have been collated that probably, and I can't be exact, but they probably add up to 1.5% of GDP things. These were proposals came from business associations and from other quarters. 1.5% of GDP. Now, I just want to actually, those who are a little bit economic literate, even if we don't have a multiplier from this, we'll add 1.5% of, we behave as if we will get some extra growth. Even if we only get 1% extra growth from this, we'll be at 5% growth with the same structure of the economy. Okay? Then we'll definitely book our flights to Washington. The one thing I want to really say is that in the situation we are, and I'll be the first to say that there's a lot of taxation that shouldn't be there. But unwinding this cannot be done, in my opinion, through an across-the-board reduction in all kinds of sales taxes, CITs, everything under the moon. Because we'll have to be, as much as we can, keeping economic stability so that we don't end up in the same situation of January 2023. So we'll need to think carefully about what can we do now to get there. You know, one of the worst visits by an international expert in recent time to this country was by Mr. Ron Laffer. He came to talk to a lot of people, and everybody talks about the Laffer curve now. Mr. Ron Laffer is something we teach at university in terms of saying, how do you spin a story and serves a politician? He did this for Ronald Reagan's election team. And he drew on a napkin a curve that says, why don't you give the impression that taxes, if we increase them, if we reduce taxes, we'll actually get more revenue? Why don't you draw this picture that we're already past the optimal point, that if we now reduce taxation, you'll definitely get more revenue, because you've discouraged so much activity that we will immediately start investing and growing this economy. Now, I know that all the taxation hurts you. It hurts your profitability, but that's not the same as saying from the moment you get a CIT cut, you're all going to invest again. I hear at the same time you say there's a lot of things that will stop us from investing. That may be one thing, but we need more. And so basically, Ron Laffer put it in the heads of people, just reduce the taxes and you'll have immediately investment and the structure changes. Now, by the way, if I get investment only in domestic-facing economy and no exporters, I'm still going to the IMF because I'm not going to export either. So that is too naive, too simple. Now, I'm not saying there are certain taxes, and there are certain taxes on people, on businesses, in certain sectors that don't have a Laffer effect, i.e. that if we reduce them, we'll get more activity. But simply saying across the board, we know that will help us, I'm telling you, there is in no country in the world empirical evidence that it does this. And so it actually comes back to, please check and think about the evidence. Don't make it a slogan and claim Mr. Laffer is there. Laffer may exist as an analytical tool, but it will require very careful analysis and not the back of the envelope calculation. So, sugar rush is not the answer. And I'll come back what potential is, because I will agree with you taxes are too high. But sugar rush is not the answer. I will agree with you taxes are too high. And I'll come back to that. The second thing is that I see a deeper malaise, and it links a little bit why many of you will not respond even if CIT goes down by 1%. Well, because there's a lot of things that are wrong in the economy. And Mr. Usman has already mentioned it, we are quite a rent-seeking economy. And put it slightly differently, I'm not saying you do, but you would know how to get things done in this economy. There are ways to get things done in the economy. There are ways to get around the regulations. And that can include having the WhatsApp number of the relative secretary or minister, or it can have other means. The first one is just lobbying. The other one can be other means. This is an economy that is endlessly not just over-regulated, but with endless exemptions, with endless ways of getting different playing fields for different players. So what I do here is that saying, look, we want all kinds of support, but meanwhile, all the other stuff is happening and all the other way of doing it. So if and I'll give you one example. And look, I totally understand, I'm an economist, how people respond to incentives. There's been a fast growth of registrations of companies in Pakistan, in Dubai, and other places in recent times. We are fully aware that because of, and probably it was because something that looked temporary became permanent. Take the super tax. And certain things gave you an impetus to actually say, look, this tax climate, I need to do tax optimization. That's normally what firms do. Tax optimization. That's not evasions. That's simply optimization. And so you move there. Now, if a tax were to be reversed today, I doubt that many will close these operations abroad now and suddenly say, oh, this is enough, I'll move it there, because you've done the fixed cost, you've set up the other places, you've optimized for that, why would you change it? Okay? And I understand that. So the asymmetry is also there. You want to be very careful. So it's not as if there is a simple silver bullet here that everything suddenly will be good again. Similarly, certain firms have optimized because the incentives are such that actually moving your payroll abroad. Well, I understand that you do this because that's a sensible, smart move. But it doesn't mean that if we do a slight change in this whole thing, because we can't abolish taxation of freelancers, if we do a slight change, will it be enough? I'm not so sure it will be. The asymmetry in measures is there as well. So even though I can agree with the diagnosis that some of these things were poorly designed, reversing it may not get us the behavioral response it is. That's why I was to say, if we want to build this economy, we'll need to be very, very careful. Let me rush a little bit in the interest of time. What would I then propose? Okay, what would I then propose? Look, and don't expect me here an exact number on something here and there. That's not my role. But I'll tell you broad lines where there's 3 areas what to do. Okay, I was amazed that the people that in the system had been arguing for a gradual tariff liberalization over 5 years, I was amazed that these people were there, they did the homework, they did well, and Prime Minister was convinced. That's the kind of thing you want to do, because that's the first thing I said of the 3 things that the countries that were successful had done. They were outward oriented. And I want to just emphasize why that is so important. That's not because actually the trade balance is not an accountancy relationship. I can suppress imports or I can promote exports. The trade balance provides incentives. If I'm exporting, I need to compete with the best, and I have incentives to keep on being more productive and think imaginative, how can I capture and keep my markets? If I'm import substituting, the only thing I really need is to have a permanent room in the Marriott or the Serena. I'm being regularly in touch with the secretary, as long as they keep on giving me a new RD, because I claim that everybody else is doing dumping and I don't have to bother with it. I only need the tariff to actually keep my bottom line intact. I just need a tariff to have my bottom line intact. Compared to the exporters, I need to compete. What is better for an economy? Discuss. I could set it as an exam question for my students in Oxford. I can assure you that Vietnam and India did, okay? They were consciously choosing not to go through this. And you could say, well, we need protection because we need to learn to be competitive. Well, there's some of these industries, they've got that for 30 years. If you have to do learning by doing, then I ask myself, what have you been learning and what the hell have you been doing as well? And that's actually why I actually think. But you don't do it as a shock, because it is tough, it's structural reforms. So you actually say, look, we're going to do this over 5 years, and I understand that's what were the approved proposals of the tariff board. That's what Minister Aurangzeb, Finance Minister, will gradually implement. We create some clarity here. We create some policy certainty. And that's why it's important. It may not be serving everybody in the same way. Indeed, it may hurt some firms, but at least we create clarity that that's the path in 5 years. The second one that I'm related that I want to talk about is then broader policy certainty. Now, this is the example. How do we create broader policy certainty? I was very struck that in the business risk surveys, that's number one, the ones that actually does the OICCI, that's number one item that people are concerned with. I've talked over my career enough with business people. They know how to deal with things, but they can't deal with policy uncertainty and rapid changes. You react to incentives, but you want to have some clarity what these incentives are. Policy certainty is the first thing. In fact, you can deal with taxation as long as you know what it is. I may have already alluded to, yes, you do tax optimization or whatever. But basically, you want certainty because then you can run a business. You don't want uncertainty. So that's the proposal that I would say. Why don't we work carefully with people like you in the room and try to think of what would be a sensible path to a better taxation regime over the next few years would be, where businesses don't have distortions, where there is more level playing field. Yes, I know that you may say words like retailers and so on. We need to keep on working on that. But within the formal sector businesses, okay, how do we make it more rational? Or to use the words of Finance Minister, how do we calibrate this in the first instance and then see how far we can get? If growth comes to the economy and we can keep it without going to the IMF, then I think you're in the business of, okay, then the tax burden can also go further and further down and you can get further things. So why don't we have a 5-year fiscal framework that we work on, that creates some certainty, just as was with the tariffs, and try to create incentives, including making sure politicians stick to it rather than every year trying to renegotiate it as well. And that would be actually quite helpful. And that leads me to the final one. It's what I touched upon, is the things that are not quite right, that are clearly harder but important. You know, commercial law, contracting first, enforcement, possible proper clarity about all these things. It will take some time. It takes a particular way that the government needs to operate and not overturn it, not giving exemptions unfairly to some and not to others. We need to keep on working on that. That will take time. The structures are not favorable for it. Let's say there's multiple stakeholders that are competing on some of these things. Similarly, with regulatory reform, try to make it simpler. Let's not try new regulation that overcomes other distortions and actually work on it. And actually, by the way, I'm in the business of receiving concrete proposals of things that can be done in the short run that actually can make businesses' life more easier. I'm not saying I can implement it, but I'm definitely in the business to talk to whoever I can talk to if these are sensible things. And by the way, some of the measures that have happened already, lots of small things from consultations with business, several of them were taken forward because they can be done quickly, they can be done without big distortions and so on. And it leads me to actually concluding here is to say, look, these steps towards long-term reform, they need to be taken today. I understand politics is complicated. Let's say there's multiple layers of stakeholders that we need to get on board on all kinds of things. That means it will take time, and there's other types of reforms that you may want, not talking about. But within that, what we have, creating policy stability will be in the interest of the political class, the bureaucratic class, the business class, and other stakeholders as well, and creating a clarity of it. But we need to make sure that the push that is there doesn't just simply want to create sugar, but actually create something else as well. I want to end here with a brief, quick reminder of another country that did serious reforms 30 years ago. One of the ones that actually were well involved, were well in that list of better growing countries. It's your eastern neighbor. In 1991, they did reforms. Everybody thinks, you know, the minister suddenly had a great idea, or Monte Calualia had a great idea, and the minister said, yeah, great, we'll just implement it, and all of it's going to be easy. You know, the biggest opponents of this reform were some group called the Bombay Club, and they used all the business associations and the business councils to mobilize. And who was behind it? Mr. Tata, Mr. Birla, and Mr. Bajaj. By the way, they're all billionaires now thanks to the reforms. But they knew how to do business in that country in the way that Usman described. They knew how to do business. They didn't want change because it works for me. Why would I want change? Yes, I can make noise, but meanwhile I pick up the phone, or I get an exemption, or I find a way, or dare I say I pay a bribe. I can do business. I know how to do it. I know my country. I can handle this. Meanwhile, I make the shouts and all the right noises, but they were lobbying. And you know what they wrote and what they said? There's no way we can export already because electricity tariffs are too high, taxes are too high, and the regulation is all against stuff. My God, I've saw that list recently from some business council. It's the same list in every country. And we get numbers thrown at you that I will say are not correct from other countries and neighborhoods. Yes, you're bad. You're not in a good state in these things. But numbers are thrown around that don't add up, that are not fair representations of the distortions that you have relative to other countries. Manmohan Singh pushed it through. Yes, they listened, and they slowed a few things down, they consulted. They didn't stop what the Bombay Club were asking for, but they consulted, and they worked with business to make it make sense. And over the 1990s, they pushed the reforms through. Because one thing, if you're a student of reforms in India, it wasn't Big Bang, it wasn't Millet that some people may dream of. Politically, you couldn't do a Millet in this country, okay? But they worked with them, and they learned to work together. And by the end of the 1990s, every political party, including all the ones that voted against the reforms, were big fans of India shining, India rising, including the current government party. They weren't initially. You bring them on board, but be sensible, be realistic. So for me, no sugar rush, no silly things, and you have to help no measures are done, but let's find ways of working together, business associations, academics, and others, to actually sensible reforms that are feasible in the short run and that actually can deliver over time, over the next few years, the kind of structural reforms we're all craving for. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Durkin. I think as Pakistanis, it was difficult for all of us to hear some of the numbers that you shared. And it's always difficult to hear that Pakistan stayed behind, but none of us are surprised. But I think your reflections really, more than anything, should give all of us in the room much to consider about how, as you said, we can become better partners in thinking through how we can get through this together. And I think you segued beautifully into our panel discussion for this evening that brings Pakistan's specifics into focus. And we look at not just the real economy, but Pakistan's long-term priorities on reform and competitiveness. And I want to request Dr. Durkin to please join us on stage for the panel as well. If you could please join us. Thank you so much. Please allow me to introduce our panelists for this evening as well. I'd like to first